Mic check 1 2. Check 1 2. Mic check 1 2.
Nikita.
Okay. Great. Okay. Anna, nice to see you. Is it Rekha? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Goldberg. I have a couple of hats. One, and at least a couple of you lovely people have me as a professor, and you have me in 3 classes because once just isn't enough, nor is twice, apparently. So I teach entrepreneurship courses here. I also run an institute called the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship, which is in ThinkBox. And we have a number of different programs, including I see our student Evelyn is in an undergraduate fellowship called our Veale Snyder Fellows Program. One of the things that's been a real pleasure is partnering with my home school of Weatherhead around an entrepreneur in residence or executive in residence program. So Rekha is one of our inaugural class of EIRs, and thank you so much for coming to Cleveland and being here. I know your old colleague and my co-dean, Andrew Medvedev, is in particularly excited to see you. And I know you've had a really busy morning meeting with folks on campus, and I know tomorrow as well. Our speaker series is always moderated by students, and we're thrilled that Nikita is, who's an MBA student, is going to be moderating today's discussion. I know you have a number of questions, but we want it to be participatory. So if you're here, obviously in person, please let Nikita know if you have a question and introduce yourself when you ask a question. If you're watching on Zoom or on LinkedIn, just let us know either in the Zoom chat or in the LinkedIn comments, and we'll make sure we relay the questions up to Nikita. So with that, thank you for spending time with us, and over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session today. I am Nikita Dials.
You need to scoot to that chair if you're not.
Oh, but I need to see the questions.
It's okay. We'll relay it. Take that special.
I'm Nikita Dials, second-year MBA student at Weatherhead, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Rekha today. And Rekha is a managing director at Morgan Stanley Infrastructure. She has spent more than 23 years in the industrial space across various global positions. Prior to joining Morgan Stanley, Rekha was with Tyco and Johnson Controls. Rekha has a PhD in statistics from the University of Waterloo and master's and bachelor's degree in engineering from Queen's University in Canada. Welcome, Rekha.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. Feel free to ask any questions if you have. And for those who are joining virtually, you can either post in the chat or you can raise hand. So I can start with the question, like, since you started your career as a statistician, so what decision led you to transition from a banking sector?
So I had no idea that was going to happen. So let me start with that. I spent, I got a PhD in statistics. So I spent a ton of time really trying to get technical, right? A lot of hours on writing a thesis and doing comprehensive exams and all that sort of thing. And so when I came out of my PhD, I thought I might become a professor, but I might go into industry. It was kind of toss up. And GE offered me a job at their R&D center, which was with the statistics group. It was still being very technical, all that sort of thing. And I thought that would be fun. So I took that and I moved to the US and just started doing that. And it was interesting because very quickly in that role, 2 things happened. One is I got to spend a lot of time directly at the businesses. So I spent a lot of time in Louisville, Kentucky, which if you had asked me when I lived in Canada where the heck that was, I would have had no idea. But I spent a lot of time there very early with my career in GE, working with GE appliances. That's where they made a bunch of appliances and that sort of thing. And then the second thing that happened is that I was fortunate in that I got to be in a room very early in my career with big business leaders. So a good example of that early on was Dave Cote, who then went to run Honeywell. At the time, he was running GE Appliances, a really impressive executive. And I got to be in the room with him while there were conversations and decisions going on. because I was supporting the discussion because I was the data person, right? So I was doing the data analytics and I got to be in the room sort of supporting the data and supporting the decision. And it was interesting because I realized that I liked being in that room, first of all. And second of all, I realized that I wanted to be the person in the room who was making the decision, not the person who was supporting the decision. And that was like a whole big light bulb. Like, who knew? I didn't know that that was something I wanted to do. And so it was a whole big process. Like it was sort of me reflecting on my career and deciding that even though I'd spent all this time doing, becoming a really technical person, that in fact, I wanted to sort of pivot away from that and instead move towards becoming a business leader. And so a lot of my career has been about following that journey. And I've been fortunate to have had really great opportunities. But I say that because sometimes I feel like people, think that some of these decisions are going to be forever decisions. And I think it's maybe encouraging sometimes to hear that they don't have to be, even after you've committed to something, there can be opportunities to pivot. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to do that in my career.
That's awesome. You recognize that in your early career. Awesome. So you have mentioned time and again, like you have been supported by mentors, and could you share your importance of mentor in your life, like, and how is that effective?
Listen, I think people who are going to support you in your career are hugely important. And I think of that very broadly. So, I consider for me, probably like a lot of people, the first people who helped support me were my parents, my family. But certainly as you think about going into a career, I think it's hugely important to have people who are supporting you, who are championing you, and they can be in a lot of different places. I've been incredibly fortunate to have worked for really great bosses, just people who were supportive, but also great models for behavior in a corporate environment. And I got to learn a ton just by being around them and watching how they do things. I worry sometimes that people sort of think that there's this magical mentor thing out there. And for me, it's not always been like that. It's much more been, I just gravitate to people who I think are really neat. And, as I've found people like that, you just try to give them opportunities to help you and try to spend time with them. And I find that you learn a ton from that, but it's incredibly important. And the other thing I'd say is that it's hugely important to have people who are going to be real with you, who are going to sometimes give you a hard message and sometimes sort of help to redirect if you're going off the course sometimes. I think all of those things are important. By the way, somebody who is also a big mentor for me is my husband. He and I spend a ton of time talking about things that are important to us, whether it's career or not. And his advice to me is hugely important. So I think of all of those things as inputs that you want to have every day. And a lot of it is more of those you can have, the better. So, gravitate towards people who you respect, whose advice is important, and who can really help and want to take the time to support you. I think that's just in general a great way to roll.
Yeah. So we have been taught like we should have a personal board of directors. So is that like something that you focus on? Like you do have something similar?
I think it just goes back to what I just said. It's about gravitating to the people that are supporting you. And so certainly anytime I've had major decisions that I'm trying to work through or wrestle through, and sometimes even really minor decisions, like just, hey, something happened today and it was weird, and I just would like to bounce it off of people. I spend a lot of time thinking about who I can bounce it off of and get a lot of inputs, and I think that's always helpful.
That's awesome.
I think it's so important. And one of the things that I would say too is that as you advance in your career, sometimes it can be harder and harder to get real feedback, to get real input that's not that's not spun in any particular way because of what your position is. And so I think it's super important to always be reaching out and looking for places that you can get that.
So how do you relate your success? We all have inspiration on like how we can keep motivating ourselves. And so what inspires or motivates you?
So I love just amazing people. And I am always inspired by that, whether it's bosses or people in my organization or just people who are doing amazing things. And it doesn't have to be anything in any particular level in the organization. It's just the stories of what people are doing. And there's amazing people out there doing amazing things all the time. So I'm always inspired by that. And I personally get a ton of satisfaction out of coaching, mentoring other people. And so that's something that I get a lot out of. And then the other thing I'd say is that I've always been in my life, I just very energized when I'm learning, when I'm in a challenging environment, when I'm learning something new, when I'm doing something I haven't done before. For me, that's been hugely energizing. And so that's something that just gives me a lot to keep going with.
So that brings me to my next question. Like, how would you define your leadership style?
Oh, I always find that a hard one. And I think it's probably less important how I define it and how others define it. But here's a couple of things that I would say around that. One is, as we've talked about, I have a huge sort of time invested, comfort around data, analytics, critical thinking, all the stuff that goes with kind of my engineering plus my statistics background. All of those things come together to be a very big comfort zone for me. So when I'm thinking about business problems, it's very natural for me to start from a data-oriented perspective, start with the facts, start with the data. What do we know? How do we work through that? But then, as I said, I'm also really inspired by people and by the coaching and development of people. And so I think my leadership style speaks to both of those things. Those are the two things that I really lean on as I'm going through being a business leader. And I think that putting those two things together can be very powerful sometimes.
That's true. So we have like currently like so many talks going around diversity and inclusion, and engineering, banking, and finance and law are still considered as male-dominated industries. So would you like to share your journey being a female leader, how you made your way in a male-dominated world, and the challenges that you have faced?
Oh, that's a lot. So it's interesting. I feel like we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion and that sort of thing, but just to take a step back, I graduated out of engineering a long time ago, and the percentage of women engineers who are graduating now versus who were graduating then has not moved a lot. And I personally find that very disappointing. I kind of felt when I was graduating, I just assumed that, that would change and that we would get closer to something that looked more equitable, and we haven't. So I'm not sitting here with a ton of answers. Obviously, as given by some of those kinds of statistics, I think that we've got a lot of room to go still. But I would say from a personal perspective is that I think you just go, right? you just go, and I think it's about being, first of all, a lot of what we said already. First of all, you have to be great at what you do. I mean, that goes without saying. It's about getting people who are invested in you, who are championing you, who are supporting you, which sometimes means tough decisions. And then I think the other thing that I think that you can do as somebody who's coming to an organization is be clear about what you want and be clear about the things that are important to you and how the organization can support you in those things. So I talked about my pivot. And one of the things I did is I spent a lot of time talking to everybody who would listen about how I wanted to change the course of my career, the things that I wanted, and getting input on how I could do that, how I could position myself. listen, there are a lot of statistics out there that would tell you that in general in organizations, people who are diverse don't get as many stretch opportunities, which, as we know, helps to define career growth, right? So I would just say that, if that's something you want to do, make it known, be out there, be visible, and be in a position where people can help you to do that.
That's right. Could you please share an instance where you had to face a challenging situation in your career?
Oh yeah, there's lots. So I'll give you one that was something that was hard for me, just because I think that because these things are hard sometimes, right? I was in a new job. There was 10 of us that were sort of at that level in that organization, in that job. I was running a region, and it was a company where the rest of the folks who were at my level had been in those roles for a really long time. They'd kind of grown up in the organization, all that sort of thing. I was new, I was a little bit different, and I was learning the role. I was there about 6 months, and this HR leader who I worked with, who is a great friend and sort of one of those people I was talking about that, mentoring and coaching and all that sort of thing. He comes into my office one day, and this is at a time when my business was tough. We were having some tough times. I wasn't quite hitting my numbers yet. I had invested in some costs in the business because I was trying to make sure we hit our customer expectations, some of those kinds of things which we hadn't been doing. And so one day this HR guy comes into my office and he says, Rekha, I want you to know that people are talking about you, people meaning the business leaders, and they're asking if you're going to make it. And so I'm listening to this and I'm not really sure what he's telling me. And I'm like, what do you mean they're asking if I'm going to make it? Obviously, that doesn't sound very good, right? And so I kind of said to him, I said, well, how are they asking that question? Are they saying, well, we recognize that Rekha is a strong leader, but her business is suffering a little bit right now. Is she going to make it through that? He said, no, they're just asking if you're going to make it. Right? Like, that's a tough day. That was a tough day. And so, those things happen, right? There are some tough days. And so respect the hell out of this peer of mine, the fact that he came in and told me that. I really respect that. And that's something I'll always be thankful to him for. And it was a tough day, and there were some tough things. There were a couple of tough days after that, but because now, like, I'm feeling like, okay, now I'm going to prove myself, right? And so that's it. There's just some days where you've got to be resilient. And I would listen, I was sitting there, I was a believer in what I was doing. I knew that it was really important that we get to these customer expectations. And we turned it around, and it was a lot of work, and they weren't always fun days, but we got it done. And the business leader at the time is somebody who is still a supporter of mine, and I'm still in touch with, and he recommends me for jobs and all that kind of stuff. So it has a happy ending, but there are tough days. And I think it's important to know that, and it's important to be convicted in what you're doing. And so when there are doubters, or when there are people who are taking shots from the sidelines, then you can feel convicted in the path that you're going down. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
I think there's a question. Yeah. So to me, here's what I would recommend. Here's what I've done in my past. Again, to me, it's like if you see somebody who's who's somewhere different in the organization, just invite them out for lunch. Say, hey, can we do lunch? Can we do coffee? Can we do breakfast? I'd like to learn more about you. Just, I feel sometimes that there's this whole formal, will you be my mentor kind of thing? And I don't think it always has to be that. Some of it can be just around, hey, will you spend some time with me? Can I learn more about you? And by the way, if they accept your invitation for lunch, it might be helpful for you to think about one thing that's happening in your world that you can then ask advice for, right? Just, hey, just FYI, this is happening. I wonder if you have any advice. What I think you'll find is that a lot of people are open to lunch, and if you engage them in a dialogue, then you'll learn something. And to me, that's what mentorship is about. Then you'll learn something. If it goes well, then you can ask them again, right? Or they can ask you. I don't think you have to look at it as, hey, I really need a long-time commitment from you or anything like that. I think you should think about it as, how can I learn? Will you spend a little time with me so I can learn from you? And I think what you'll find is if you phrase it in that way, people will be very open to it. Of course.
Yeah, wait 1 second, we're gonna have the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
So my name is Manish, and I'm also a Master of Finance student. And just to add Wisdom's question, how to actually identify mentors and like how to actually identify that this person can be a mentor for me, and it can be good for me as well.
Well, so I don't know that that's necessarily hard, right? Especially if you're early in an organization. A lot of people have been there a while and have good perspective on things, right? So just look around for somebody that you think is kind of fun. I mean, I try not to overcomplicate them, right? Like, there's a lot of people out there, and a lot of them will be open to having lunch. So just think about people that you see that you interact with, or that interact with your boss or something like that, that you think you can learn from. I don't think it, to me, mentorship is not about somebody who is your perfect fit necessarily, right? It's just about, how can I learn? And if you're early, there's likely a lot of opportunities out there.
Understood. Then my next question is, when you said as in like you need to let the other person or the organization know that this is what you want in the career. So how not to become as in like not to come across like a over ambitious person?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think that's a fair concern, because if you walk in the day you walk in and you're like, I want to be CEO and tomorrow, that's not going to go well, right? So I think you need to be measured always when you're talking to the organization, you always need to be measured in first demonstrating what you can do for the organization, and then being in a place where you can ask what you want from the organization. You always have to be measured that way. And if you walk in on day one, you haven't done the first thing yet. So you don't have the right to do the second thing, right? It's when you've developed credibility and you've demonstrated your value to the organization, then you've earned the right to kind of say, hey, by the way, here's what I'm thinking. And it should never be as a demand or any of that sort of thing. It should be, here's generally what I'm thinking. Does that make sense? Can you guys support me around that? What do I need to do to put myself in a position to head that direction? All of those kinds of things. So I think that's a very legitimate concern.
My next question is,
Hello, my name is Carlton Cherry. I'm here as a post-bac student. One of the earlier you had talked about how you would transition from just being in the room to while other people were making decisions, and you transitioned to being the person who was able to make those decisions. I wanted to ask, what type of skills and characteristics did you have to develop to make that transition?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Carlton. And by the way, that was a multi-year process, right? Like that did not happen overnight. So a lot of it is making sure I knew what I had to learn. In my case, as an example, I didn't do an MBA, right? I didn't know the language of finance and all of those kinds of things. That was something I needed to learn, and I put myself in places where I could learn that. So a lot of stuff like that, just things I needed to learn that I spent time investing in and learning. I'll also give you a very specific thing that I needed to do, which is take some risks. I kept telling people that I wanted to run a business. And people kept saying, well, we're not going to let you run a business because you haven't run a business. And I'm like, and that feels a little circular, right? So I got to a point in my career where somebody said, okay, we're going to let you run this business. And it was a little business. It wasn't that big. It was a branch of ADT security. There were 100 branches of ADT security, so I couldn't screw it up too bad, right? And it was at the time I was sitting at the corporate head office of Tyco. And so I was sitting in kind of the ivory tower, and all the big execs knew me. And they wanted me to go run this tiny branch in the depths of the organization, right? I was going to report to 8 people above me, would report to these execs that I kind of hung out with in the halls. And I did it. And it was a big risk. It was a big risk. And there were a lot of reasons to not do it necessarily. But I did it because I wanted to get out of the circle of, we're not going to let you do it because you haven't done it, right? So sometimes they took a risk, I took a risk. And it wasn't like if you'd asked me what my ideal role was to go run a business at that time, that wouldn't have been it. But it was fantastic. It was a great experience. I hung out with 100 people who installed and serviced ADT security alarms. I learned a ton, and I did it for 8 months, and I got promoted to the next level within the security organization. So all of that to say that there's not one answer, but it's a lot of learning, and you've got to lean into the learning, is what I would say. Of course.
Yes, ma'am. So my name is Ripal Patel. So I'm doing Master of Accountancy course, MAC course. So my first question is like how the networking is important as a student, and what are the means that we can use to like market our skills, especially?
Oh, I don't know if I have a lot of great answers for that. What I would tell you, the whole networking thing kind of grates on me a little. I think it's important to connect with people. And I think it's important to do that in as genuine a way as you can, right? But I don't have any magic answers on just how to get out there. I think what I would say, I mean, listen, you guys are much better experts than I am on social media and LinkedIn and all of that sort of thing. So I'm not going to offer any advice on any of that. But what I would say is be genuine, have it be your voice, make sure it's real. And certainly for me, from a networking perspective, I don't bop around network parties giving out people cards, but what I look for is somebody to connect with, somebody that I'm genuinely interested in understanding what they do, they're genuinely interested in understanding what I do, and somebody that I want to go get lunch with afterwards. To me, that's kind of how I build it.
Hi, I'm Yue, and I'm a Master of Supply Chain student. So I'm an international student. So when I'm doing the job search, I have a lot of opportunities like globally. But what do you think is the most important factor for entry-level graduate like me to consider for the first opportunity in my career?
So I think that's hugely exciting. And if you're open to something global, I personally think that that's amazing. I think go for it. Go live somewhere that you wouldn't have ever lived before. Learn a ton. Getting back to the whole learning thing, I think learn a ton. My advice early in your career are 2 things. One, be in an environment where you can learn and soak up everything, because that is the time to do it. Get really deep into what you're going to learn and really deep into what you can learn in that environment. And then the second thing I would say is work for a great boss. Just find a great boss and work for them, because you're going to learn so much by being around somebody who's a great boss that you'll just be able to soak up. I think that those are the two things I'd say early in your career. Of course.
Hi, Dr. Rekha. This is Sahil. I'm part of math program. So my question to you is, how do you identify potential in others? Since you said the starting journey for your leadership, you started with a couple of branches, they evaluated you. Is Rekha going to make it? So when you are taking the decision making, and how do you have to rely on other people to handle the business? That is the second step after planning that your execution is happening. So how do you identify the potential that this person has the potential to take it forward, to implement it in the right place?
I'm not sure I totally understand your question. So how do I, sitting as a business leader, evaluate people? Is that what you're
You
asking?
have to assign someone to do the work.
Yeah.
How do you identify that potential? What are you looking for that in potential person?
Yeah, so that's an art, right? Hopefully what you will find is that every business leader thinks that they're incredibly good at judging talent, because that's what we do, right? So we should feel like we're really good at it. But it's an art. I mean, listen, my view on these things is when I'm leading businesses, I try to get to know my talent very well. I work deep in the organization. I like to have conversations deep in the organization. And I spend a lot of time evaluating a few things. One is I evaluate attitude. Are these people who are positive, who lean into problems, versus people who are making excuses, or people who are telling me why things can't happen? I look for accountability. If somebody tells me that they're going to do something, I'm going to watch if they do it or not. And if they don't, then that's a big message to me. I watch for how other people perceive them in terms of what is their ability to create team, to create motivation around them, all that sort of thing. And that isn't just for somebody who's a boss, that's for anybody in the organization. And then I look for skill. What skills are they bringing? What experience do they have? Do I think they can take the hill? So listen, it's an art. It is definitely an art, and there's no magic answers. But what is definitely true is that I'm not excited by people who are, telling me why things can't get done. That's not somebody that I'm going to lean into on that. Well, no, no, not necessarily.
Kanj. I'm a junior studying data science and economics here at Case. I'm just curious to know more about what you do right now as an operating partner at Morgan Stanley, and I guess more specifically, some of the executive decisions that you take.
Yeah, so I think that's quite a puzzle, what I do as an operating partner, right? So I'll try to explain it a little bit. So we're a fund. We're like a private equity fund, except that we are focused on infrastructure. What it means is that we raise a lot of money, and then we go buy companies and then sell them for hopefully more money than we bought them for. My role in all of that, so we have on the fund, we have a bunch of people who are deal team people. So they're always looking for those deals. They're the ones who are modeling the deals. They're the ones who set up the buy of the deal. My role is that when we own the asset, I work with the CEO and the C-suite to help drive the value of the business over the course of our ownership. So I sit on the boards of these companies, and I'm basically like, I like to think of it as a CEO coach. They probably don't like to think of it that way, but I'm somebody who works very closely with the CEOs to help drive value for the business. And so it brings my experience of being a business leader. I'm not the business leader itself, but I am working with the CEO to help drive value and to help grow the business, is what I do. So as part of that, I do things like I recruit board members, or I recruit CEOs or C-suite members with the CEO, that sort of thing. That's something I spend a lot of time on. Okay. Did you get a follow-up question? Sorry. You'll have to raise your hand again, I think.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, this is Celia Casanova, and I am in the MBA program. My question is, what is one thing that you would like to know before that might have helped you in your career?
Oh, so many things. Honestly, the one thing I wish somebody had told me early on is just to relax. I don't know if that sounds counterintuitive or not, but I remember just being so anxious about everything early on in my career, like just everything. And yes, it matters, but in the long run, stuff will work itself out. And I wish somebody had told me that just relax and enjoy the ride, because it's a great ride, And if there was one thing that I wish I'd thought harder about, it would probably be that. Does that make sense?
I have another one, but it's very quick. What you enjoy the most of being a leader?
What do I enjoy the most about being a leader? Honestly, it's the impact. It's feeling like somebody might be thinking differently about something today because of the impact that I was able to have. And sometimes that impact isn't always positive, right? That doesn't mean that every conversation that you have with people in your organization is positive. Sometimes they're quite tough, sometimes they're quite confrontational. But if you can contribute to somebody's career growth, their personal growth, that they think differently about something, I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. And sometimes that's, by the way, because you collectively accomplished something, that as a team, you were able to do something that was a pretty big deal. And so that's what I get a lot of pleasure out of. Of course.
Hey, I'm Ryan, also in the MBA program. I think you speaking about your current role to the previous question kind of shed a little bit of light on this, but I was just wondering what the process and the rationale and the feelings were going from after being in industry for so long to going to a financial services shop. And was there a long period of flirtation, or it was kind of the opportunity arose and you jumped at it, and kind of what was your mindset?
Yeah, good question, because it is a big change, right? So a couple of things I would say on that. One is what really happened was that we were talking about mentors. Somebody who was my mentor in my past job at Johnson Controls, he left the company, and he'd been gone. He's somebody I stayed in touch with because I told you about gravitating towards people that you think are awesome, and so I stayed in touch with him. He called me about 3 years after he left the company, and he said, "Hey, I've got this job. I think you should come work for me." And to be honest, I'm not sure I would have listened as much as I did, but for the fact that it was him. And I knew he'd be a great boss, and he has been. And so I thought really hard about it. One of the things that really excites me about the job that I'm doing right now is, again, that learning. So in my old job, which was fantastic, I was leading a global organization of 3,000 people, really enjoyed that, but felt after a number of years that I was very deep in that and not very broad. And so one of the things that really excited me about this job, which has absolutely turned out to be true, is just the number of things that I get to learn about, the number of industries, the number of businesses, all of that sort of thing. I feel like I'm constantly being exposed to new things, which I find to be really exciting. So that was kind of my mindset when I got the call.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Anshul. I'm a freshman studying finance. My question related to your experience regarding leadership, both as a leader and also under various bosses that you've had. Something brought up in my management class was the balance between expertise and authority. The idea of having technical experience in a field versus kind of a raw aptitude for being a leader and also being able to manage others. So I was curious, I guess, over the course of your experience, how have you seen the balance between those two ideas play out in terms of making successful leaders and successful bosses?
So I think here's how I would frame that. I think to be successful, you have to be credible. And what that means, it can be different at different times in your career and at different places in the organization. So when I first came out of doing my PhD, the thing that was going to make me credible is whether I knew my numbers or not, right? And whether I could do the data analytics. I told you the story about how I was in the room early. I was in the room because I was good at the data analytics and because they trusted me on that, right? As you potentially go away from being technical, you need to understand what you're going to be credible about, right? Because if you're going to be in the room, especially if you're going to be a leader, you have to be credible. And so it's about learning the skills that make you credible. And it's about, and that is a long process. That doesn't happen overnight. There's no books, right? So that's what I would say is I don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about management as management. I think about you've got to be credible. And by the way, being a leader in an organization, every day is different, right? Every day could be a new challenge. It could be something you've never seen before. New stuff is happening all the time that could change your organizational dynamics. So it's about being credible, and it's you got to show up in the way that is going to do that. And it likely means you're going to have to do a lot of learning. No problem.
We have one more question.
Hi, Rekha. Good afternoon. So my question is, well, like you have 2 decades of experience. How did you foresee yourself the setting a milestone and ensuring that you meet the target? Like suppose you plan to meet like achieve one promotion or some position. So how did you see throughout the journey? If there is any delay, how did you go about it?
Remember this thing I said about relaxing? In hindsight, I would be more relaxed about that. I often, and I know that this is a thing that people are saying these days, but I think it's really true, which is it's not a career ladder. It's a jungle gym. And so a lot of times I think I was more impatient than I should have been. I thought about it more linearly than I should have been. And what instead I should have done is enjoyed the journey, sort of not spent as much time hung up on the next promotion, but really just spent time learning and enjoying the learning. So if I had to do it again, listen, there's always that, right? There's always, this could have been faster or whatever. I have no regrets on hindsight on any of that. I think it's been a great journey, and I should have just relaxed more. That would be my reflective on it now, sitting here today. Of course, it's easy to say that in hindsight, right?
Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. I think he had a follow-up question. I don't know.
I think my follow-up just was that, you just mentioned that you sit on the board of a bunch of different companies, and based on certain macroeconomic factors right now, like say the recession and stuff like that, we see a lot of companies, laying off people, and they're trying to be more lean and focusing on productivity. So, like, how does like a CEO, or how do you, being on the board, sort of advise the CEO to sort of do that and make certain decisions so that in the long run it's really essential for the company, and it builds up the value of the company in the long run, I guess?
So there's a lot of decisions that need to get made every day as your CEO, trying to think about building the value of a company, right? Sometimes it's about reacting to the environment, and unfortunately, sometimes those decisions are tough when they involve laying off people or whatever else, right? That's unfortunate, but what I've learned in my career is that not facing into those decisions makes it even worse, right? And so I think one of my learnings as I've led different organizations is that if you think that you have to make a tough decision, you probably do. And the sooner you make it, the less tough it will be. Because if you wait too long to make those tough decisions, then they get even worse. So, and nobody likes to do those things, right? It's never fun. But I think that that's the lesson I've learned. And whether it's having to lay off people or making a tough decision about an individual because they're not well suited for their role or whatever, those are the tough decisions in business. They're never fun to do. But but my experience has been that avoiding doing them is not going to be a good outcome either.
Hello, my name is Carlton Cherry. I'm here with the Postback program. I know you had talked about your experience in research, and then that you transitioned to business. I wanted to know what were the skills and experiences that you brought with you from your PhD pursuits, and how did they help you build credibility in business?
So great question. I definitely feel like having real depth in data and understanding statistics has always been helpful. Just especially now, right? Like you think about how much data there is out there. I just feel like that's always been something that's been helpful to me. I also, frankly, think that being in an R&D environment, later, when I was leading the fire suppression business at Johnson Controls, as an example, I had a team of engineers who were working on R&D. And so for me to be able to engage with them and challenge them and all that sort of thing, having come from an engineering background, having come from an R&D environment, I think gave me a lot of credibility to be able to do that and to collaborate with them in a way that was really productive. So that's why I think early on in your career, you want to get deep in the space that you're in, because that's your chance to really learn that in a way that you can then bring with you for the rest of your career. And I think for me, that was absolutely helpful in terms of, as I was pivoting, to have some things that were really foundational for me to build on in my career.
So we have one question on Zoom. I think we can take care. Carl, do you want to unmute yourself and ask yourself, or I can go ahead?
Sure, I can read it. So I'm an alumni of the Masters of Supply Chain Management program. So the question that I have is, how did you learn to balance your technical background while learning to let others do the work, but then also knowing when you have to ask for more information, given the fact that you could just do the calculations yourself?
So that's a good question. I think a lot of that lens has to be around developing your team. Your role as a leader is not necessarily to provide answers, it's to make sure the team has the answers. And so for me, a lot of that was about coaching people to do things versus doing them myself. And some days that's not the most efficient way, right? And some days you don't necessarily have the energy for that and all of that sort of thing. And the questions you ask should be around confirming and understanding that the team has really gotten to the right place. But what I would say is that as a leader, your basic function is somewhat different. It's about making sure that the team gets to the answer versus you getting to the answer. Does that make sense?
I think so, yes. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, any more questions? Yeah.
So hi again. Sorry for the people who are on Zoom for my first question. So you said your division at Morgan Stanley was in charge of buying other companies. Do you look for a specific company to acquire, like companies who are in financial distress? And once you acquire them, what type of decision do you take to improve those companies?
So financial distress is not necessarily a criteria that we look for, but we do have the framework of certain aspects of companies that we're looking for, both in terms of size and performance and industry and all those types of things. But again, sort of my role is to work with the CEO to really understand the business levers. What are we going to do to grow the business, both top line, bottom line, what are the opportunities? What can we as Morgan Stanley do to support the organization? So that's kind of what it is that we're focused on.
You mentioned about being visible. And when you say visible, isn't like if a person has to be visible, he has to be from work perspective or from isn't like participating in other events which are going on in the organization. How do you actually make yourself visible in the organization? Is it just through your work, or is it like you have to do something extra to make?
So that's a great question. What I would say to being visible is, for sure, you've got to be excellent at what you're doing. That is number one. How you're going to be visible is you're going to be excellent at what you're doing. I think if you've clearly demonstrated that, then you should also be somebody who's just generally trying to help the organization, trying to help your team. Be constructive, come up with ideas. If there's something that nobody wants to do, put your hand up for it. You know, just be in a place where you're helping to provide solutions to the kinds of things that the bosses are thinking about, right? So don't be the person in the corner that's always complaining about why this event isn't a great event, or we should have done this or done that or done something different. Be the person who's helping to plan it, right? And to me, it's not about events or any of that sort of thing. It's first of all being great at what you do, but then help solve things. Be a person that other people can go to. Help resolve whatever needs to get done. Because there's always stuff in organizations that needs to get done, always. And so just be the person that's going to help do that. Kind of how I think about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Rekha, for sharing your insights. And we are glad that you came here and shared your experience with us. So we'll have.
My pleasure.
So we'll leave the floor open for, like, if you want to network and then ask question one-on-one. So yeah.
Thank you.